This is Chariot TV.
Hello, you're Mobibia Kwaba, Eba Chariot TV. Now, show who's a Apologetic Hour. Midi edit Derrick Danso, na send him in the down, see a shower Apologetic Hour. Ya fa twero sem no ya fa asoma hodo ho no ye de esi ho no ya hwehwe be se e ho se asoma hodo wo wi ase na mu de wo he ne ye di ekira ebe ma ye nkwaje ne abrabo esi yie na ade ba ko nso ya eta ye pa ne se ye bi se ye ho se adenti na wo gidie adenti na wo ye kristoni na wo nye nkremoni adenti na wo gi bibidi na wo reject bibi sa no ma se e bi na ye di ho nkomo e wo sa show yi so na eto de bi mpo a ye gi bra hwehwem se onyankopon mpo owo ho anase oni ho apologetic we ni bebre na yeye na this time no de yaji bra yesuan ho ade ne ya kirekiremu eye se ye ka se gospel na se ye ka se doctrine ensonsun e bi da ntemu ana are there some distinctions within these two enti ye theme ye discuss now no false distinctions na so kan ho last week any last 2 weeks abon si agibra yesuan saadi we enkakra me gidi se wusuan de bi afri because me ankasa no me suan de bebre afri mu yen se ebre kra no ye be ma wahu preacher o kan ye ho studio ase ene obebe boa ye metumi addo saadi suan we se mu esuko na se ni ye be ko saadi suan we se mu no na me kai wo se Chariot TV ye wo YouTube ye wo Facebook ye wo Twitter ye wo Instagram ye wo TikTok you all these platforms and they tell all you know say yeah boa dia sempa no akonipa bebre enchen enti ni ye show nkran ni ye srawo say wo bra wo ba show ni so no na wo so o share ama foforo say wo hwe o YouTube na wo share ama foforo wo hwe o Facebook na wo share ama foforo afi say wo nyan like any of your platforms and subscribe here no abomo dia no ai ni sa say be new video be be ba no abomo dia na wa download na wo so etumi ni afoforo ache kai ye besre wa men free dwumedie ne so kai ho wa bra yesu ade akwakosi dwumedie no ewe ye nyema bebre enene ye besua ye ncha ho krampo no men introduce me speak me guest our studio ase no ache obi bia unim no ye friend no Mr. Jonathan Mensa Bonsu a preacher e Committee 8 and 9 church of Christ. Preacher Kwaba.
Yeah.
Na apombo ko de.
Nyame adom, no ye pa. Na won say,
Nyankopɔ adaroma. Bibia ye fine. We there last week you shall say yesuan false distinctions. I mean, yenya reactions be on videos I so far no, and it's interesting say enuanom esuan nyoma yenya questions be any objections to nyoma here discussing. So I would like us to go back, recap nyoma na ya discussing no yemfa comments ni bi aba no so na yen responding to some of them na mo ama nyoma mu and na ho yie pa anti yen say bre kra no within about 5 minutes no wetin aboa me recap nyoma ya sha sisi yesuan na okay ni beje pa
me da see na me fa akonya so na ma Chariot TV nyina say ojebre na dan dan nyina no otena se ehwe Chariot TV yedwumadi na se me kai wa ye sha se no ye sha se suan se nipa bebre na nchechire bi a omode aba omo chechire feature nsemu ne se ofa apamfoforo no apamfoforo no ewo nsemienu ewo messages mienu eka two messages in the New Testament. One of the message eka the gospel and one of the message the doctrine. In the New Testament can be divided into two, the gospel message and your doctrine message. And nipa na churches and your man when I churches and your man in churches say so nipa be Christian then he needs before be Christian he have gospel, but after being a Christian then he has a doctrine emano. They make the distinction now to the extent say omo church emieti ase say well say ye the asam no e komo bi ni kwase ye church no asempa no ye preachi nemo abra wa preachi dipa no amna be Kristo ni awie no na waji Kristo atum no wa be Kristo ni no na ono nso no wa church no doctrine ebi wo kra denominations no particularly no ability to doctrine to the extent say they believe that the core message and idea ebetimi amaya fro bi say o Kristo ni no is doctrine a gospel, but doctrine there in fact so no ye built from churches, built from traditions, built from men in the denominational circles no so only obi kasa na no ni sua there times or kaka gospel na gospel men can doctrine the doctrine there ehun here any asori bia the doctrine when doctrine is coming from the idea say people tend to make distinction between the message of the New Testament. Say apamfofo ne nsemo a eka no nchemu mienu ene wom na eno na ye twe anuanom adwagina so say ente sa akra false distinction for a person to distinguish between the gospel say in the New Testament no your gospel message and your doctrine message there, that distinction is not in the New Testament. Now eno na ye sha say call back to history kakra na yebobobo so nioma esie ene wona a washa ase churches happen na afede ani see Bible no na impo yesu ade o passages bi a enkofo bi aka na passages bi a kasa na ye hwe ese nya esitie ese ne be betimati ase. One of the passages ye hwe was 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse number 1 to 3. Me try adwinjina so say you see that passage is not teaching that the only message in the gospel is the death, the burial, and the resurrection. All other messages are not the gospel. That's not what the passage is teaching. But so you shall see verse by verse. Yes, I pick it up from Matthew chapter 28. I discuss 1 Timothy chapter 1. They discuss a lot of passages. Now, I didn't know per se a Trinity party. Say the message, the gospel message, and then the doctrine, they are synonymous. In some way, I can different things altogether, but they are messages that are speaking the same thing. Last week and the last 2 weeks, that
is interesting, and I think say what boni na to kama my pie, that's the power. But before we even get into addition, the person who say ye ka gospel, ye ka doctrine, ye ka sam you say. From last week, last week, my say it's a false distinction if you claim say and so be danimi enu tema. That just say ntiasie bi na enye den anyhow. Now maybe that say so my title question apart from the denominational friends say doctrine doesn't save but gospel saves. Wait me am I a further explanation on that?
Yes, it's because in their mind there is a distinction.
Okay.
You see false distinction back what me say jambre be kan ho asem between Christ and his church.
Yeah.
See, some people think that there is a wedge between Christ and his church. You can get Christ and you'll be saved without the church. You see, one way you might be thinking that is true. Because in the New Testament, mostly it will be telling you that they preach Christ. They preach Christ. So you might be tempted to think that preaching Christ does not mean you preach about this church. Or you preach about something he taught. You see, your name of Jesus Christ church.
Yeah.
You see, you might be thinking that preaching Christ just means that telling people that Jesus Christ came to save, and that is all. In the denominational mind, obi a denominationalist, not also say doctrine is coming from men, traditions of men. In the no but the gospel rather and but you realize that in the New Testament both save. Both save. You see, the gospel is God's saving power, and the doctrine is also God's saving power, and they are the same message. They are the same message. In Romans chapter 1,
yeah.
You see, verse number 15 down to 17, particularly verse number 16, Paul says, I'm not ashamed to preach the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone who believes. And in that passage, we realize that Paul is telling us that the gospel saves. But Jacob, 1 Timothy chapter 4.
1 Timothy chapter 4.
Yes, verse number 16.
1 Timothy 4 verse 16. Now can I say, take heed to yourself and to the doctrine, continue in them, for in doing this you will save both yourself and those who hear you.
In the answer is so just said doctrine is so genuine. So see, it's both ways. The content of the message, and let me stress this. The problem with people, the problem with people has to do with the word doctrine.
Okay.
The problem with it is this. You see, the word gospel, can be a gospeler. It means good news.
Good news. Asempa. Okay.
But the content of the message is not inherent in the definition of the word good news. Which news is good?
Okay.
It's not inherent in the definition of the word gospel.
Because I think say if you call New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we can see the gospel of the kingdom.
Yes. The gospel of yes.
There are, because sometimes there was a time. Let me share them. I think there are three or four different kinds or kind of gospel of the kingdom. I've forgotten the other forms. How I'll use
your gospel of Christ or gospel of the grace.
Yes.
There are a lot of variations. Yes.
Yes.
You see, the content of the message that we call good news is not evident in the definition.
Okay.
The same thing is with the doctrine. Casa doctrine means that which is being taught and that which is taught.
Let me say for the first time. So I say doctrine.
Yes, doctrine is that which is being taught. So if I'm teaching the cross of Christ, are you telling me that the cross of Christ I'm teaching is not doctrine? I'm teaching it.
Not just say me share the concept of love. A doctrine.
If I'm teaching someone about resurrection, and you are telling me that the fact that I'm teaching resurrection, you see, is resurrection a gospel by any doctrine, so I can't teach resurrection. Those things are things that depend. The word doctrine simply means that which is being taught.
Okay.
And what you are teaching
is the doctrine.
Okay. And then I think Timothy say, back and read the text. Maybe I can. 1 Timothy chapter 4.
Yes.
Verse number 16. Read the text and put instead of doctrine, let's replace it with that which is being taught.
Take heed to yourself and to that which is being taught.
Yes, dear Timothy.
Continue in them.
Yes.
For in doing this, you will save both yourself and those who hear you.
You see, they don't tell us that the word doctrine here doesn't tell us exactly the content of Timothy's teaching. And doctrine simply means that which is being taught. So it's sad to say people have a serious problem with things like that. It's because of our common usage of the word. You see, at times they can say, doctrinal issue, doctrinal class, doctrinal. Yes. In our minds, we think, doctrine, we think of Lord's Supper, every Sunday.
Okay.
You think about something like they're more instrumental music.
Yes.
You think about Titan,
Sabbath,
Holy Spirit. You see, those are the things that we are thinking about when we are thinking about doctrine. So what if I'm teaching someone about the death of Christ? I'm trying to prove to someone that Jesus Christ came to die.
Yeah.
I'm teaching that thing. And then the other.
And now we
that's what I'm being taught.
So even this would help us because me now before a more denominational law, that is to say, me tight pa or tight chair me say, oh, say asema wo ka chair me there mo nchire. And to say that is doctrine, and therefore it doesn't save. But say if Jesus Christ ni wo ni see any no story ho de a ene de asempa no ene de o kan obeti. Instead say clearly no, that's a false distinction to say ye kasa about say ani to say if we say baptism ani a doctrine. But e chire okay.
You see anything you can think of. The death of Christ, the cross of Christ, they are things that we can teach people about.
Yeah.
And the Bible wants us to go and teach them. We teach people about it. Church is that which we are teaching. And since we are teaching that thing, that is a doctrine.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. That's the simplest thing that you can think of it. So that is the meaning. So it's because we have taken that word out and crown the word with some sort of theology with it. Now, giving us a problem. That which you teach. If you say the New Testament is teaching something, at the core of the New Testament is the doctrine.
Now, me per se passage based on the Okan 2 John 9:10. Now, Oboy was kind of so say, whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son.
Yes.
In this case, you know, onye later maybe say we say, who's our doctrine who asem wa ho. Say the one na Yesu nchire mu no oni eja ene oba no.
Yes.
Na obi biara otena o say yes, Christ does not have God. He who abide otena Yesu Christ nchire mu ono no wa eja.
No sa oba no.
Ene oba no. In this case no, you better make say gospel ni just one example of nchire. But you want to say for free can ho a buama nkwaje edimu.
No, not that. You see, it depends on the direction you are coming from.
Okay.
Let me give you my memory kakra. You see, the New Testament system is a system of belief.
Yeah.
In the Bible, at times call it faith.
Okay.
It's something that a man has to believe. I was saying
yeah.
The New Testament system is something that a man has to believe, and the Bible call it faith. It's something that is being taught. The Bible call it doctrine. The same message is something that is being taught. The Bible call it doctrine. The same message is that thing that gives good, that brings salvation. And then so it is good news.
Okay.
So it's the same message with a different angle. You see, John second passage, John now canon. Also, obiara ontena Christian church, the doctrine of Christ. In other words, the Yesu church obi or deviated from it.
Yeah.
Obi or deviated from the Yesu Christ church. Oni ojankopon. Indeed, you what man say, for instance, does resurrection form part of Jesus teaching?
Yeah. Say obi.
So only people who are sorry. Does it form part of Jesus teaching? And the other man from you say, are you trying to tell us that the second coming of Jesus Christ is not also in the gospel?
In the same, after me question na obisa na say Yesu Kristo ti ase na o kire na chidifo asomafo na beboa 1 Corinthians 15 ti ake me say ye wu a ye won kwaje bi anidaso obi wo ho no.
Yes.
Until that time no, that was when Yesu Kristo na nkasa o ti ase na onya nwu that time person obeka sa asem obedi no ho nkomo. But me person me bisa question. Said about the second coming, nyoma you after first 4 gospels. You consider we as doctrine and as a gospel.
That's and I say they are the same message. See, it's interesting. Say there is, I believe that maybe I'm not sure of this fact, but I believe that the reason why in our New Testament Matthew was the gospel according to Matthew. Yanka say nipa natural. It is only Mark that began with the gospel. It's only Mark natural. Okay, said the gospel of the gospel of Christ. It's only Mark. Matthew, Luke, John. They didn't begin that way.
Okay.
You see, and I believe because of that, no more. or more true Bible here, the gospel according to Mark. It doesn't mean that what is being taught in Acts, what is being taught in Romans, what is being taught in Corinthians do not form part of the gospel. That would mean that those things don't form part of the good news. And that's do you get it? It's part of a sempa. Example, I think last week or so, I said, see, Onipa Baku, I'm a son to someone.
Yeah.
And I'm a husband to someone.
Yeah.
And I'm a brother to someone.
Exactly.
By the same person. So the gospel is something. The content of the message, is not revealed in the word gospel.
Okay.
They say it can be someone who means to worship the same content of the message, can look at it as a doctrine. Why? Because it's being taught.
Yeah.
Someone can be looking at the same message and can look at it as faith because it's a system that needs to be believed.
Yeah.
And then on actually that distinction of say, well, where gospel, doctrine is not it.
Then this will bring me to this question. Last week, but let's go back and clarify yet again for First Corinthians 15.
Yes.
Because saying that here, like you can last week, any last weeks, and not quite definition among the baby.
Yes.
Say you can go gospel or First Corinthians 1:15, 1 to verse 5. Now maybe say verse any church mo edi me you share sa contest now bet me my explanation can be fa verse in regards to say sahasemi enye gospel ni nyina no last book kind.
Yeah,
say,
I point out
it's a foundational message that has more to it. So can you add up to that?
Yes. To add to that, you see, then maybe the first time the person is watching us. The first thing that you are reading First Corinthians chapter 15, you should ask yourself, let's say, what occasioned Paul's writing? Because what occasioned Paul? What caused Paul to be writing First Corinthians 15? Okay. There are a lot of messages or things that can be discussed there. Yeah. But what caused Paul to write First Corinthians chapter 15? Yeah. You should answer also first. See, Paul is not defining what is called gospel. Okay. There is a problem that has arose in Corinth. Paul is trying to clarify. So that's how we can First Corinthians chapter 15 verse number 12, 13, 14, 15 Obeka say, "Nia onkophobia or Corinth or masha say kase, say o sorry e cry ni ho." Sure. And now some Paul say, "Na o sorry ni ho there then what there na mujidi ye." Because in the beginning, me ba mo ho kane no. Dey me che church ye no. Me church ye mo hunu say, "Yesu Kristo wo sie no, na nsa so sorry." And na me kire yeah. And now Paul kind of First Corinthians chapter 15 verse number 1 to 3 say, "Adi edi nkan me de share mo nsane say, ye mboni nti Kristo wi." Say the Johnson Lacan. Yes, but it doesn't mean that is the entirety of the gospel. But Paul say the first of importance, as the old King James would tell us, or firstly, and now first of all, other translations say chiefly. Yes. But me no didn't come on make say chiefly. It doesn't mean that is all. But the core of it, you can say the core of the gospel. The core of the doctrine of Christ, the core of it is the death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the burial, the resurrection, and the death of Jesus Christ. Yeah. That is the core of the Christian faith. That is the core of the Christian teaching or the Christian doctrine. That is the core of the gospel. But that is not all the gospel. See, it's sad to say, we can't see things like this. You see, the core of the gospel is the death, the burial, the resurrection of Christ, because that brought about Christianity. But that does not mean that is the only gospel. Yeah. The core of the Christian faith. What is the core of the Christian faith? Is the death, the burial, and the resurrection. Exactly. And that forms the core of the doctrine of Christ. That the death, the burial, and the resurrection. You can't say what is the core of the cardinal teaching of Jesus Christ and the cardinal teachings of Christians. That's the death, the burial, and the resurrection. But that is not all. Yes. So you can't say well, the death, the burial, and the resurrection are not the teachings of are not the teachings of Christ, or they're not teachings. In other words, they are not doctrine, but they are gospel. It's just a misunderstanding on your part. It's just a misunderstanding. But it's sad to say. You see, we have been so entrenched with that idea to the extent. Say now, I've had a lot of response from some of these things. You pride some of them now. They have a lot of response. So last week you show I have a blog. We post things like that today. Now. me upo some
nyabutre o say preacher or blog yaka blogger I say a website or the articles in your market to my no just in case obi person go follow up na or go read more because I've read the article myself, a very excellent article. Also the name baby to me.
Yes, you just search gospel broadcast on Google. You search gospel broadcaster, it will pop up. It will pop up, then you search there are articles on the homepage. You realize one of them is the minimum can once for distinction gospel and you see people send messages back to and respond some of these things, and some of the things that people are saying, you realize that the person don't have a slight idea about what he's talking about. Only slight, you see, we have been trained with ideas. I say, you be first time when you're Christian. I was say a cat gospel but obey Christian and a cat doctrine. Who made that distinction? And it's coming from a lot of misrepresent, like you are representing so many Bible passages here. At times, it beats imagination. And one of them is Matthew 28.
Matthew 28. We
have spoken about it. I think in last week or last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth we bringing it back and looking at it again.
Okay. I have one question to ask here, and it came in last 2 weeks, so we'll look at it. But let's finish Matthew 28.
Okay.
Yes, Matthew 28.
Yes.
Verse number. Okay, it's on the screen. Here verse number saying.
Verse number. Yes, I said verse number 19.
28, verse number 19. Yes. Okay, can I say? Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen.
Yes, I think about screen also send a boy or some of the things.
Okay.
You see, so her text no. Most English you do a class at times. This is how we teach it. That the first part of the Great Commission is let they go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them.
Yeah.
Then when you baptize them, you are done. Then after you have baptized them, they have become Christians. Then the next step will be teaching them to obey all the things that I have commanded you. So that is how a slim sort of how we have been teaching that message for some time. And the sad thing is that is false. That thing is false. The entire man here false. And they say, you see, in language, in the New Testament language, the phrase "make disciples," one word, but it's an imperative. The word "make disciples."
Breaking it down.
Yes.
What's it? Make disciples in the original language.
Greek, imperative. I don't want to bother ourselves with which word is that. No, imperative. Imperative means it's a command.
Okay.
And by the screen here, you realize that go is also underlined. Go also has a force, the imperative force, the same thing. And so you said command.
Yes.
Baptizing also have the imperative force and also command. Teaching has the imperative force and so your command. But there is a distinction. Jesus was clear of what he was saying. All the four make disciples and then accrue the imperative. And they imperative.
Okay.
Baptizing and teaching them are participles. No, they carry the imperative force, but they are participles. Participles, I say, they are helping verbs. In the end, they say, how to make the disciples.
Okay.
You see, the issue is, Jesus say, go therefore and make disciples. The first question is, how do we do that?
Exactly.
Then Jesus explained how to do it. How do we make disciples? Jesus says, by baptizing and teaching them. This is not even me saying this. You see, let me quote some people so that we get a fair idea about what we are saying. As an American, I'm not a Greek scholar. See, I'm not. Yes. But there are people who have studied Greek who understand what is being written in Matthew 28, verse number 18 to 20. And we employ Obi already say he should verify some of these things for himself.
Sure.
The idea is to come and say, you go and make disciples, baptizing them, bring them to the church.
I've heard that before.
Now the church, I know what be teach you. The on doctrine is then we come and teach them the doctrine. No, that is not it. Let me quote one passage. Obia, I mean, he's a Greek guy. We call him your friend Daniel B. Wallace.
Yeah, Daniel B. Wallace.
Premier Greek scholar.
Very, very good.
The book will be outro. I say the title of the book here, The Basics of New Testament Syntax.
Okay.
New Testament syntax. Syntax rules that govern language. Syntax. Now say no okay, page 274 to 275. That section is fine. I say a good way to think of this is that participles go baptizing and teaching. You see, participles go baptizing and teaching. No, actually it tells how making disciples is done. And of course, that's to the question, how do you make disciples? One could answer by going the means and baptizing the manner and teaching the manner. You see, so the question of how do you make disciples? No, Jesus answered it in that passage. No other way. Go by going one way of going to make disciples. By baptizing them is one way, and by teaching them is one way. So at times, and at times, the issue back before we begin say, well, do we make disciples before we baptize them? You see,
and I think there was a time somebody asked this question, say, are we finish making somebody a disciple, then later we come and baptize them?
Not in this text.
And this was the text the person
yes, see, in language there, you might understand that it's true. The sense of the word disciple means a learner. So someone you are studying with is a learner, is a disciple in the definition of the language. Okay. But not in this text. This text is teaching us that, you see, make disciple. How do we do it? Then Jesus gave us 3 participles. 2 of them is baptizing and teaching. And the participles are telling us how to do the imperative, which is making disciples. So there is no confusion about this. That intimidate and your normal journey echo so far from the truth, so far from it now. Any confusion about on things like this, and that is something I think is worth. But let me read Daniel B. Wallace.
I answer read Daniel B. Wallace. The anime Kai will say way Apologetic Hour on Chariot TV. Now they discuss false distinctions, gospel and a doctrine. Na me sa kai wo se wunya share video ni ma fofra ya be share ebia be so what ma kai aba be do this point there e just say we need jujumedie no na yes subscribe to your YouTube channel no, like your Facebook page no, afi mama we fi so be share video no ama fofo ne akoso a dane da nyina say the new video ba wo so say tumi aka na akoso esua de yes opportunity no leave you comment or comment section on na no interact if you say you hear wadwen kire you hear also what questions bi afabra we nyina ye nsua de na moa adesua no we apologetic ye to am common so
see mamen kan Daniel B. Wallace the same text, okay. The basis of the New Testament syntax. He made an interesting comment on page 280. Say no can say a greater emphasis is placed on the action of the main verb than on the participle. Main verb no any make disciple no. Okay. Participles no any go baptizing and teaching. No, say that is the participle is something of a prerequisite before the action of the main verb can occur. Because it will be a prerequisite. I just say adia uhia ansana adia biaba. Sure. And his point is that baptizing, teaching and going, they are prerequisites. The main verb on the kind. Now some more kind I say they are prerequisites before the action of the main verb can occur. In other words, going, baptizing and teaching are prerequisites that must occur before the action of the main verb can take place. That clarifies issue.
And going to
making disciple and how do we make disciple? The participles tells us how to do that. But at times it gives us so many problems because of that distinction we have made in our heads.
But even maybe some question, can we even do all this? Everyone say me makwabo ntini obi kwa kusua nyankopon asem.
Yes.
Me do ho na no. Ja me chire nipa no. Ana man chire na
I sometimes beat imagination how people say
because u chire mu nyina na mean I get the technical you are udiye wremu ankasa and ye ni je ho dwumedi we so sa na ye hia wa ha but me ma mi otifia o ha na papa otifia o hwe ena makon ena opeso adwen a sa adwen na woni timo say me papa we nya opportunity one obi a owo ebi a certification mu me nua bi aba me pesa me ni edi Bible ho nkomo onye Kristo ni afi na me be introduce you to the concept of onyankopon asem ama na me hu nyankopon na nyankopon ya adoma ono so nkwaje aba ene dia first thing na me ye no enye nkyerɛkyerɛ
I sometimes yes, I sometimes bit imagination.
I don't know bro for na doctrine.
Meaning how you people even call it. How you try and tell us, say for instance, you meet someone for the first time, and I only didn't come. See, the person don't even believe the Bible.
Yeah.
Why are you trying to tell the person that there's a Jesus when he doesn't even believe that the Bible
is even God's existence?
Yes, he doesn't even believe that. So if the person doesn't believe the Bible, he doesn't believe the Bible at all, then you start trying to show to the person that the Bible is the word of God. What is that? What is that? It's a form of teaching. It's a doctrine you are teaching. It's the gospel. It's part of the gospel. You see, and that is the problem. People don't see what they are talking about. Say, okay, the dead, the buried, and the resurrection. Until you meet someone who is completely new to Christianity. Until Yesu Moshe, onim Yesu no in the first place. Onim no krada. Now onim kwase be a friend the Bible. What the two who quote say Colossians. Why will Colossians make meaning to the person? Why will 1 Corinthians make meaning to the person?
I had to say it here no be Bible catcher will say or shall say quote alpha T hane incremufo.
It will
unless the person takes you from a point.
Yes, to show you first that the book he is quoting from
has authority.
So that foundation how will you build upon to try and prove to the person or show the person or teach the person that Jesus Christ came to die for his sins?
But there is a question that we will look at. But don't you think, say, coming within the brotherhood? No?
Yes.
Here in Ghana, one major issue we have here is that it's not an issue, but it's rather to me sometimes I think whether it's a blessing or not, in the sense that I've had this countless times. Say, most of our people are aware of God's existence. They agree to what the authority of the Bible. Like most of these things, the people are aware. Yeah. But normally, no be sure be no adeba kwa on shada engine to me say na say konkro no kwa bia oda so yen senkyerene ana say e wo say Christopher wo ye hye mu memenda ana say we Christo ni kra de we ntua title unko heaven no. Yes. Ana say we Christo ni na kwa sorry dem de so sepel ho wa asam udi ntwene na nka sa no we na e de conflict eba enti biribia no kwa bontina kwa kira de a for example say me kwa bontina me new amanfo osuade. These are questions you keep on meeting. And don't you think say it is based on this in the way classify some way as doctrinal issues? Now we introduce it to Jesus Christ, the death, the burial as gospel. Don't you say how a bit of distinction well in our part of the discussion?
I can't specify much on that because it's broad. It's very, very broad on a lot of people's point. Personally, to my experience and some of the things I've realized, it's basically coming from our tracks and how we studied. It's coming from how we study some basis. The basis is to study yes, woman, and as a papa. You see, that is the basis of some of the things that we started studying. And we started studying, say, you train how you know, be saying, you see, oh, we need to come out with something as a panel there. Then you go 50 to 50, 1 Corinthians 15. You see, the New Testament message, anything that the New Testament is teaching, form part of what we call the gospel. It form part of what we call the doctrine. Anything that the New Testament is teaching, unless it's not what the New Testament is teaching. And I will show you passages like that. For instance, the New Testament does not teach that for someone to be a Christian, the person must be circumcised to be saved. That is not it's not Christian teaching. It's not part of the Christian doctrine. Okay. But do you know, in the whole book of Galatians, that is why Paul wrote in Galatians 1 verse number 6 to 8 that there is another gospel people are teaching. Yeah. Paul was not talking to the Galatians that the Galatian people were thinking that Jesus Christ the Galatian people were thinking that Jesus Christ I'm sorry. That is not, and their point was that there were people who were teaching that for someone to be saved, So a boy to say the person ought to be circumcised in order to be saved. And then Paul said, no, you are perverting the gospel. You see, so all the message of the New Testament.
But honey, young mommy, say Paul catcher one said they are perverting the gospel, even though it was issues related to circumcision.
A circumcision it's not the book of Galatians is not addressing whether Jesus Christ came to resurrect. No, that's not the issue. And I used to Christ to be weak. Of course, there is a passage passages that hint on things like that. But that's not the concept that Paul is correcting. Yeah. Paul is correcting an issue that has arose among the Gentile churches. Jewish converts, Christians, I shall say them now for say they have to be circumcised in order to be saved. You remember Acts chapter 15? Exactly. Conference with Jerusalem. Now almost say church say no, a person has to be circumcised on before obey Christ. And that was a perversion. And such a matter like this, Paul categorized it as another gospel people are teaching. You see, so that is something I think that is worth.
This makes it very, very clear. In addition to all that you have said, even though na enya dia enne nipa bebre can say the death, the burial, the resurrection about circumcision. But yet Paul referred to it as another gospel.
You see, before we continue, before maybe you ask your question, you see, Matthew 28 will be clearly understood in it. Let me give you another passage in the Bible. It's not talking about what we are talking about. It will explain the force of what I'm talking about in Matthew 28. Okay. Look at Ephesians 5. One of our popular passages. Yeah. Ephesians 5, verse number 18.
Ephesians 5, verse number 18.
18 and 19. Yeah, those two, yes.
And do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord.
Good. You see, in verse number 18, Osman for Paul says, do not be drunk with wine, in which there is dissipation. Yeah. The phrase be filled with the Spirit is the imperative. That's the command. Be filled with the imperative. But the Bible tells us how we are supposed to do that. How we are supposed to obey the command of being filled with the Holy Spirit. How do we do that? Then he gave us imperatives, 3 imperatives. One of the imperatives is that speaking to one another. Speaking is the imperative, a participle that explains the imperative. Being filled with the wine. And being filled with the Spirit, He's showing us imperatives, participles that explains how to carry out that command. Being filled with the Spirit. One of them is speaking. 2 is singing. 3 is making melody. You see, making melody, singing, and speaking, they are the participles that explain how someone is being filled with the Spirit. And that is the exact force in Matthew chapter 28, where baptizing and teaching tells us how to make the disciples. It's not like Jesus said, he has the literal language in the English or Chi is saying, then you bring them to the church, then you teach them. If you say no, let's make disciples. The baptism there.
Then this introduces a concept. I think even I've heard skeptics use this a lot of times. Some more cassetia Bible, no matter some use way that say, "Enti wait me achire nipa no bibia wie ansa na obeye Kristo ni there bi enti obeye Kristo ni wie a wo ba asafu nim no na wakoso achire no. Won't you say at that point there's some distinction? Say yentimi nchire no nchire ni nyina wie enti ya chire ni bi no aye gospel no still na me say church is a doctrine na when we na ba church ni no be to aso a chire no doctrine
no it's not true in a sense. You see, Jesus didn't tell us the quantity of message that the person needs before and son abonesi.
Okay.
You see, he didn't tell us that. The Ethiopian akwa onam asmafo di maitiri nwotwe no kona no Philip ne kasa no o say na chariot hue no
yes
chariot hue no ndi omo kono no na Bible say o ka kira akwa ne say na akwa na asem o ka odifo asem o kan
ono ane ho asem
ana ofofuru bi ho asem still na chariot hue no ana Philip ka gina sa twensem na so e kan ne Yesu Kristo ho asem.
Yes.
na bra omo nam kwan so kono
Yeah.
ana o church Yesu Kristo hu asem na obusa ne say hwe ensuoni
And then
I didn't see Mesubo kwan.
Acts chapter 8 and 7 year king.
You see, and so didn't see. You see, he stopped the man preaching in the midst of time watching. It's not like Peter Church, Philip Acheni in every. You see, he was talking to him, teaching him as they continue going.
Yeah.
And I stop when they say, "Ura insuoni." They didn't see Mesubo kwan. See, at times the war can be say, well, because I'm in church, will be being you. I'm in church, I'm in church. No. Abra Philip Tenzo, do ako menina gidi a ho kwan sa. No say me gidi say Yesu Kristo Nyankopon me gidi. And I say o shema tiase na me gina.
No ni mbe nu nyina konsuo ni mu.
Akobo na su. So it's not Yesu man.
And opie no so Bible say opie no honhom no
ehwim ne koy.
Kwampo koy.
So the who go and teach him there?
To where we ka say sanka just a wunya nkyerɛkyerɛ nyina wi a.
Yes. Okay. Then there will be a problem.
Okay. Okay.
See, there will be a problem. They didn't give us a quantity. Idea say we in church, if the person understands what he's doing, he understands that if he is baptized, he's forgiven of his past sins, and he doesn't need to go back to them. If he understands that concept and he knows what he's doing, then the person ought to be baptized.
Okay, then this brings me to the question I was talking about. Why did Paul use doctrine of demons and not gospel of demons from 1 Timothy 4 verse 1? Where a question back one. I say no, there's distinction between the gospel and the doctrine. And this question based on in command within the comment section, and the question was that's 1 Timothy 4 verse 1. Why did Paul use doctrine of demons and not gospel of demons? And when you continue with the
but before maybe we answer, let's answer that one.
Okay.
See, I so you be kanya.
1 Timothy 4 verse 1.
Yes.
1 Timothy 4 verse 1. I'll say, now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies in hypocrisy. And
so what is the good news about demons?
Okay,
what is good news about demons? Paul, I don't know when you see it. There is nothing good about demons in the first place. There is nothing good about it. What is good news about them? There is nothing good about demons. So why should I say, well, why didn't Paul use the doctrine of demons? We are not saying that the word doctrine, casa doctrine, is exactly synonymous in language to the word gospel. No. What we are saying is that the doctrine of Christ and the gospel of Christ are the same message. The word's definition, it doesn't give us the content of the message. It doesn't. That's not. It doesn't. The gospel of Christ and the doctrine of Christ are the same message. So it's up for the person who disagrees to show us where the doctrine of Christ is talking about a different message from the gospel of Christ, and that is for them to show.
Okay.
And so to say, well, I don't Paul use the doctrine. Why don't Paul also use the faith of the demons? Because in some sense, the gospel is the faith of the faith.
Yes.
Did you know? That is the gospel.
Yes.
Indeed, why didn't Paul use that? It's not something that it's not a question that pertains to something like this.
Okay, even here it is a doctrine of demons. Say in other words, based on the word doctrine, teachings of demons.
In
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So what is good about demons? Paul intro good news about demons.
Okay. And there was another one with regards to 1 Timothy 4 verse number 16.
Yes.
1 Timothy 4 verse number 16. If you may, concerning say Adentina, you catch Timothy say take heed to the doctrine, because he was already a Christian. You can't just say take heed to the gospel, because by then Timothy was already a Christian.
So that we can make
by that
we can infer that, well,
there is some distinction.
So we can infer that after Timothy, Paul and then Kasa were now we giant gospel not watching. He's not taking heed to it. Is that what we are saying?
That's not the case.
You see, that would be serious. Say gospel no we jai to action. We jai gospel because the hearing doctrine. Because all the mention the hearing doctrine. We jai gospel. Take heed to yourself. Don't worry about the gospel, but take heed to yourself and the doctrine. Timothy is a preacher. He teaches the congregation. So what he is teaching is what Paul is talking about. And what he is teaching, the content is not different from the gospel of Christ.
Because even in Romans 1 verse 16, the message, that letter was to Christians.
Yes.
But again, that is gospel to them.
Yes. Okay. So to say well, I then Paul and use the word gospel, Timothy, take it to yourself and the gospel. Well, I mean, it's very low. It's below the belt. Very. It's not worth even discussing things like this. How can you say that the fact that Paul used the word doctrine means that then Timothy has to hold into the doctrine, the gospel? No, he's still with the gospel.
Okay.
It's the same message. The content of the message is not. It's not something worth. But I think let's go back to some of the passages. I think but before I call Romans chapter, I want us to read Romans chapter 6. Okay. But before I call Romans chapter 6, let me clarify something. And now what we are saying.
Okay.
We are not saying that the two words, the words itself, doctrine, gospel. We are not saying that they are the same words in Greek. Or we are not saying that the definition of the same word. No. Or the same the two words, in a sense, I say two words, is the same in definition. No, they are two different definitions. We are not saying that. That is not what we are saying. What we are saying is that those two, the gospel of Christ and the doctrine of Christ, the content of the message is the same message. The same message. In other words, resurrection form part of the gospel of Christ. And resurrection is also the doctrine of Christ. I don't know where that distinction will come in.
Okay.
So someone talking about resurrection is preaching a doctrine the New Testament is teaching. Someone teaching something about doctrine is about resurrection is also teaching something or the gospel. So that is the content of the message are the same. Okay. And let me show you a passage. Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17.
Okay. Acts 17.
Yes, before we will go to Romans 6.
I don't know.
But Acts chapter 17.
Acts chapter 17.
Yes.
A Hawking kind verse number.
Acts chapter 17, verse number 18.
18 they say, Then certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered him, and some said, What does this babbler want to say? Others said, He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods, because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection.
You see, this was the scene in Athens where Paul was preaching. Paul called Athens. Athens, they were not Christians. They were not Paul preacher. They were healing people. Paul shall say Kasab. And some two schools, philosophy schools, Stoics and Epicureans. What is this babbler saying? I said, "Oh, can you move be who accept?" And look, a comment to say, look, a comment to say,
because
he preached about what? Jesus and the resurrection. He preached to them about Jesus and the resurrection. But look at verse number 19.
And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak?
You see, Athenians even say, they are poor area, he is teaching. He is teaching. And they almost say, Omofa call Areopagus. Areopagus is more of like a place for discussion. In your balance, a community center, place culture center, national theater, something like that. You gather women also discuss it. Dominico General Areopagus. We want to understand this new doctrine. Which doctrine? The resurrection and Jesus Christ.
Gospel, which is Jesus and the resurrection, the death and the burial. And here it is also called doctrine.
Because they had the knowledge, they understood what he's saying, that he's teaching them something. Or church bibi. Inti ko fo say, e dey en church for na play ken. Or so they call it God's doctrine. And they are not wrong. They are not wrong. They are not erring. Because it's something that Paul was teaching.
Yeah.
Paul was teaching in the marketplaces. Or church there, oh, jom, oh, I don't know, Musa and say, now, opportunity as some okay, they are not church day, and church for. So that clarifies us that, well, the gospel and the doctrine of Christ, the content of the message is the same thing.
The gospel.
Go to Romans 6.
Okay, Romans 6.
Verse number 16.
Verse 16. So okay, me pacho kai so be shama for. Yenko so yensua de. Romans 6 verse number 16. Do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one slaves whom you obey, whether of sin leading to death or of obedience leading to righteousness. But 17, but God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered.
Verse 18.
And having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. I speak in human.
You know what I mean? Let's think about this verse well.
Okay.
You say questions. First question you say, I want to say, what did these Romans do in order to be set free from sin?
They needed to obey the gospel. Without obeying the gospel, verse 1 and verse 1, chapter 1, verse 16.
Okay.
Without the gospel, you cannot be free from sin.
But look at the text. From the text itself, what did the Romans do? Look at the text.
But God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine. They obeyed the doctrine.
They obeyed the doctrine. Anna, am I yet deliver from sin? But as you rightly pointed out, for someone to be delivered of sin, the person have to obey the gospel. Also, you see, yes. But I say, no, asempana, ye city man, or smart for Paul, or true Roman for no. Or say, Bufri akumamu, brem, my son, say, a man, chere, no subai, or de bushim, na more day, who boni, more better than qua. So before the Romans could become Christians, they obeyed the gospel, they obeyed the doctrine. They obeyed the doctrine. So they didn't become Christians without obeying the doctrine.
Enti mebo say clearly that means say the idea say abontain your gospel inside their doctrine no how not disprove this point
it status is complete.
Say outside no Paul chere omo that form of doctrine and they deliver omo and that same doctrine no is also called the gospel.
And that is why most of the times we say the plan of salvation. Why do you think that the phrase plan of salvation is coming from? It's coming from here. You see, it's coming from the fact that Paul said in Romans chapter 17, 6:17, say, but God be thanked that though you were slave of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form,
that
pattern, that plan. The plan of salvation by yes, that is where it is. Where will you go to say plan of salvation? It's coming from here. It's coming from here, and it's true. I think
one topic I'm evangelism is scheme of redemption.
Yes, yes, and that clearly shows us that that is the gospel. And that is it's the same thing. They are one and the same message. As some chrono and what you see, let me just read another passage. Philippians chapter 1. The last passage. Okay. Yes, Philippians chapter 1. Maybe there are a lot of passages we can look at.
Yes.
But then we have Philippians chapter 1.
Chapter 1, verse number
27. He is writing to Christians.
Philippians 1:27. And also can say, only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come to see you or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. Yes.
And Paul say, there be mama masempa nfata Christo asempa nko. It has to come in your life. Mama masempa no, mama brabo no, emfata Christo asempa nko. Are you telling us that their life has to be worthy only of the resurrection, death, and burial of Jesus Christ? No, the New Testament message. Their life, their conduct has to be consistent with the New Testament message. That is what Paul is telling them. That mama mabra bonfata Christo asempanenko. Na mabetu wana mbetu mo mehumo. Mabete se bujina pinting jina jidie kromu jina asempano. So he's not the Bible is not distinguishing between the gospel and the doctrine and trying to tell us that say we be Christonia, then we teach you the doctrine. Unye Christonia, let gospel. And some even go to the extent of saying that the gospel must be preached, the doctrine is taught. So when you go out there, we shouldn't teach, we should preach. We shouldn't teach, we should preach. How will you even do it? If a Bible say the and say you should teach someone, let me see. Or preach someone and let me see. Never do obey.
I think say Nyanum say what can you hear see the basis semra. The can say yes your apologetic hour so say when say apologetic hour so we help to correct, especially say uji bibidia uji ni saying say wo say unji bibi nso ndi nso ana unji ndi say untumi enkasa me de enfame ho. Yeah, that is why we are looking at some of these things. At least a boy me to me sharpen your sword ni ye na se ye kwa bonten afofo esua ade a ye hu kwa fa so aye no say bi nso a onso wa bonten we unyo Christoni na wutie na. By understanding some of these things, you see, say Bible no and now sa akwa also de bre ni ehwe mu yie ni etimi esua ho ade ate ase yie yemre ne ko passages na aka no say obebobo so a kire ne kan ba akopa medima ma 2 minutes pe na ye de ayesa na ye de wrap it up.
I think that we have said enough of the passages to be able to show onipa bi a otie say that distinction is false. Say for someone to say there is a gospel, there is a doctrine distinction, you know, we have said it enough. You used to so many passages which I think say it's worth keeping. I am a boy, but my summary or my final words to us and say, Minyano, see, the Bible was given to us to study. Say yensuya ahwade. Enti si enya akonya say etna Bible no ho. Let us verify what we hear. Let us verify what people are saying. Let us verify what we are being taught. The obi church no, the obi catch no, the obi ma catch say what translate no. Mama yenhwe mu yie ansan ya jatu. Most of us are hinging on the words of a preacher say. Papa amejini dia o yes papa can say. And that is killing us. And na Emma kakran Bible mu nim de ehira ewe mu. Say young kofo a be diligent student. You see we quote Acts chapter 17 and quickly tell to people when you catch them kofo say beria for young kofo a na omodi mo they were fair-minded people. They said the scripture daily to see if these things were so. But think about it. Yeah, Christopher, so many years are we sitting down to verify these things? Are we sitting down to check these things? See, one of the passages that people like to use, also Peter Shasiano, or Kasaya, or Acts chapter 2, no gospel, or Acts chapter 2, verse number 42, no cross my phone in church. Indeed, there's a distinction between the gospel and the doctrine. Look at this. Look at this. So what should they teach? They are holding to what the apostles were teaching. Were the apostles teaching something other than the gospel of Christ?
No.
To ask is to answer.
Yeah.
To ask that question is to answer. Are the apostles teaching something aside the gospel of Christ? And that is far-fetched from the truth. Say, no, cross my point. And we use those passages to the extent that we don't seem to think about them. I am more of like a hammer. We just hold it. We don't think about them. Yeah. The fact that you are saying they were holding steadfastly to the apostles' doctrine, it's just telling you that what the apostles were teaching, that was what they were keeping to. What were the apostles teaching? Were they teaching something contrary to the gospel of Christ? If not, why not?
Wow. If not, why not? To ask is to answer. This is apologetic hour. Now, nyoma ye jebre see a false distinction, gospel and a doctrine. So I can do some penso ya. We hu ye no. Midi ede Derrick Danso na so nyankopon hirae no ma ye nkofofra. Next week, same time, same day, Thursday, 6 p.m. Ebe shia nya koso adi nkomo. Men free a channel is to subscribe. Bribi adi new video we ba no. Also say to me aka. Ya da obi biase ya crown.